every federal contractor, you have to have a minimum of $50,000 worth of contracts, and you need to also have a minimum of 50 employees. Now, I do want to stop at this point and just mention the fact that at the same time these regulations came out, you also had regulations that came out relative to veteran issues. And those requirements and the thresholds are different. And so I just want to make sure that we're clear. This webinar is all about the disability component and not the veteran component, but there are simultaneous things you need to record at the same time. So now we move on to more fun things, and we'll hop on to the next slide because this is where life gets awfully interesting. For those of you that are not aware, you are now required as a federal contractor to utilize a very specific voluntary self-identification form for disability. And the criteria for the form is very specific. And so if you've seen the form before, it's very detailed. It has, in essence, 3 sections. The first section is entitled, Why You're Being Asked to Complete the Form. And frankly, it's 2 paragraphs that is nothing more than letting the reader know, hey, this is pretty much a federally mandated form, and we're asking you if you volunteer the information. Interestingly, in the second category within the form, it's entitled, How Do I Know If I Have a Disability? And for those of you that have ever dealt with any ADA issues, that's exactly where the language comes from that's within this section. The type of disabilities that might be included, and of course, it was written by a lawyer at some point. So it says it includes but is not limited to, and gives you a whole bunch of possibilities. It's within this second section that an individual is asked to voluntarily self-identify. And they'll do it in one of 3 ways. There are 3 boxes. Either, yes, I have a disability, no, I don't, or I don't wish to answer, which of course means they could have a disability, but they don't want to fess up. And this is also the place where they insert their name and the date. It's interesting that it asks for their name, but it doesn't necessarily ask for a signature. But I didn't write the form. The third section of the form is actually on the second page and talks about the accommodation. And so most of the form is really to, I think, from my perspective, convince the potential employee or existing employee that there's not going to be any retaliation for filling out the form, and really it's in everyone's best interest if they answer it honestly. Now, the regulation is pretty specific. You can do this electronically in terms of how you provide it to employees, but if you do that, there's some very have to do. So first of all, you have to include the control number and expiration date that's displayed on the existing form. The text of the form can't be altered in any way. The form has to be presented in, and I can't make this up, sans serif font, and it has to be at least 11 pixels. Now, that's if you're going to do it electronically. Of course, if you're doing it by paper, you just need to reproduce the form. And by the way, you are required to maintain a copy of the form, either in hard copy or electronically. For the purpose of disability, this is the only form that you can use, and you can't augment it in any way. We have provided here for you on the slide the link directly to a copy of the form should you need that, but I did want to make sure that we really went through exactly what you would need in order to do this.
So I got a couple questions for you, Louis.
Sure.
When we're talking about candidates, where is this form on the application?
It's normally, well, you can do it in a couple ways. Primarily it would be almost after the application. So either you're going to recreate your application where the last 2 pages would be the form, or it would literally be the type of thing, if you're online, it could be a box where they click and then they go to the electronic copy of the form.
Okay, so you could, so positioning is not required by the new regulations in terms of where it is that you ask somebody who's applying for a job to be able to use the form to declare themselves, right?
Right.
Okay.
I mean, their big
so go on.
No, I was going to say the big thing within the regulation is just that they want this particular form with the exact verbiage that's here to be utilized.
So I can put this form in any way, shape, or form within the application. So if I am encouraging you to apply, and here are a couple things that you should know about the application you're about to fill out for a job, I could say, here is, and by the way, we encourage you to click on this form and deal with it now. Or we could do it at the end of the application, doesn't really matter. But the point you made, which I really want to make sure that I'm clear on, as well as everybody else who's on this call, is that form can't be changed, right? I don't have much capability to change the verbiage or the look and feel of that form. It's a digital landing page, if you will, that people would go to, and they would answer these questions. Is that correct?
Yes. And in fact, what I would do, Jerry, is I might even go a step further, and I would ask, if you're setting it up electronically, I would almost not allow someone to finally submit the application with at least marking it as, I don't wish to answer.
Right. So that's a good point. So from your perspective, you want to cover the fact that on your application, somebody failed to read that note that they could go to this form and fill it out. So you want to force them, if you will, to say, I'm aware of this form and I choose not to go any further.
Exactly.
Got it. When you looked at this form, by the way, did it appear friendly, or is this kind of governmentese? I mean, I know my opinion is everybody's got themselves covered on this form. It's not one of those things where it feels very welcoming.
Well, it doesn't, and I think that's part of the concern.
Okay.
You know, I would agree with you that it almost looks more governmental, if you will, in the sense that it has all the right buzzwords, but that doesn't necessarily mean that a potential applicant is going to feel all warm and fuzzy about filling it out.
Right. And I think the critical point for folks who are interested in complying is that your application might in fact be more casual, more welcoming, more inviting, so that people will you'll increase the percentage of people who not only start applying for your job, but actually finish the application and submit it. So if part of your process is to send people to a landing page where they have to complete some things that isn't that friendly, it can create some issues that you're going to have to address that go a little bit beyond the compliance. That's all I wanted to kind of raise at this point.
And Jerry, another piece to that is, if that's the way your organization is set up, that it may behoove you, rather than just say check the box, there might be some type of friendly explanation about why it's there in the first place, to try and soften the blow, if you will.
Here's why we're doing this, and even though there's an explanation of it on the form itself, we'd like to tell you in our words what you're going to be, getting into here, because we want to encourage you to participate and to disclose or what have you.
Absolutely.
I think it's important to kind of engage in this conversation now, because this disability form is a very big piece of this OFCCP compliance, because they've supplied not only the regulations but the actual form to use. And obviously, a number of people who just want to comply, they're happy with that because they can stick it in, but it may or may not do what it's intended to do, which to have people declare themselves.
And I think that remains to be seen in the end, and unfortunately, and we'll talk about it in a little while, that can create somewhat of a challenge.
Okay. Well, thank you.
If they don't. So the next question, of course, is, now that we have the form and we've talked about the form, what do we use it for? When do we use it? And our next slide gets into some of that. Really, the most important thing to recognize is, and we were just talking about the application process, obviously that's the pre-offer stage of when you would provide this form to an individual. But then you're also supposed to do it post-offer. Now, interestingly enough, what this essentially means is if you have an onboarding process where you bring people in and have them go through some type of training before they actually start work, you could provide another copy of this form. I understand the redundancy, but another copy of this form that would then allow you to have them potentially self-identify yet again. And I didn't make up this stuff. This is just sort of the way it goes. And allegedly, you would then capture, even if somebody didn't want to identify before, now they've already been hired, so maybe they feel more comfortable, they can then fill out the form. Now that just deals with people that are applying. Then we switch to people that are actually currently working for you. And one item that I want to mention before I get to the people that work for you right now is the fact that the post-offer self-identification request has to occur before somebody starts actually doing their job. So you couldn't do it where they came in, filled out all the generic paperwork for medical and whatnot, went to their desk, started working, and at some point during the day you gave them the form. It really is a form post-offer they would have to fill out before they even start any work at all. Now for your existing employees, the regulations talk about, in essence, putting out
is that essentially before day one, Lewis?
Well, it could be, it's interesting, Jerry, it could be on day one, but before they physically start their work. So if it was a receptionist and they come in and they talk to the folks in HR, it would be one of the forms they would fill out before they went to the desk to start taking calls.
Okay.
Like I said, I don't make this stuff up.
No, but I think it's important to know some of the nuances of what's being asked here.
Mm-hmm. No question. Now, we talk about existing employees. The request to self-ID is on the same form, and it's supposed to be done within the first year of the plan for the organization. We'll get into the plan in a moment, but the idea, in essence, is you're providing this form to all of your employees and asking them to self-identify. Now, you can do this, once again, in the hard copy paper form, or you can do it electronically, assuming all your employees have access to the online form. I'm sure you're all very excited about that. Now, just to make life more interesting, you're then required to resurvey your existing workforce every 5 years in the same manner, or at least at the moment, unless the regs are changed. But wait, there's more, because you're also supposed to remind your employees to self-ID if they so choose outside of those windows. And you can comply with the remind your employees part by posting the notice, the same place you post all the wage and hour forms, and sort of, I jokingly call it like the wall of shame, where all the federal and state forms are that we're supposed to post for all employees. All right, so now you sort of understand the timing that we're talking about. Any questions about that? Okay. Now the record keeping on this, you truly, you have to appreciate our federal government, because the next slide gets into all the different crazy things you have to record. Now it may be that you have recorded these things in the past for other reasons, internal reasons, but now there are all sorts of statistics you get to keep just because you want to. And of course, the first thing is the number of people who self-identify that they have a disability. Seems pretty self-explanatory. Now, it's also possible that you're going to need to know, and you would have this anyway, you got to keep the total number of job openings you have, as well as the numbers that you fill, and the total number of applicants for all the jobs. Now, you can very quickly see how the larger an organization you are, the more information this ends up being. Because then we also have to include the number of new hires with disabilities and then the total number of applicants hired. So if you're on a hiring spree now, as we move through the economy and how things are moving right now, those numbers can balloon rather quickly. And you get to keep all that information for 3 years.
Now, most companies have already been doing this for race and gender.
Correct, and actually, they want...
Right, so this is just adding disabilities to what we've been doing all along, supposedly, right?
Well, correct. And here's the little zinger for you. Right now, the government is only asking you to record the information. However, these are the very same numbers that you would use in determining whether there was adverse impact against a specific group.
Right.
Only now in addition to race and gender, now we're adding disability.
Right. Actually, we're adding disability and veteran, but this focus for this webinar is primarily on the disability side of that particular regulation, right?
Correct. And I think the biggest reason and why we all sort of thought this was such an important issue is because, first of all, many more people are non-veteran, may have a disability, and many disabilities you can't see. And so there is an exception to this form if the business somehow knows, or it's a visual, disability that you can see, you are allowed to record those. But I'm imagining that's a very small percentage of people who could otherwise be claimed to have a disability. The most interesting part in all of this stuff ends up being the analysis that the regulations request that we do. And the next slide highlights some of those items to you.
One question I had, is the 3-year retention the same as it was in the past, or is that an additional year?
It's an additional year.
Okay, so it used to be 2 years.
I believe it used to be 2 years, and now it is 3.
Okay, I think it's important to note because for some companies that's a key issue. So, all right. So next slide.
And thank you. You know, from my perspective, you mentioned before, Jerry, that we're already recording for other areas this information. Likely, you're just going to end up keeping everything for 3 years, even though you may only need to hold the disability information.
Yeah, let's not, you know, in most companies, you don't want to complicate the issue, so you might as well deal with the most onerous time frame as standard.
Exactly. Now, here, what I attempted to do was highlight a challenge that, frankly, has never existed before. When these regulations came out, I would argue this is sort of the most unique thing that's in here, outside of the form itself. Because the OFCCP created this nationwide 7% utilization goal for qualified individuals with a disability. Respectfully, I have no idea where the 7% came from, but that is supposed to be the goal within, in essence, every job group. And so you're supposed to do this analysis for every job group unless you're a contractor with 100 or less employees. In that case, you can look at it throughout the entire workforce as opposed to a particular job group. The challenge, of course, is you may run this and find that you're at 1% or 2%. In other areas, you may be much higher than 7%. In the event that you're below 7% in any job group, or if you're a smaller contractor within the organization, you're required under the regulations to come up and create an affirmative action program or an AAP. And that's where you're supposed to get into action-oriented programs where your goal is going to be to seek out individuals who have a disability to increase the number of individuals that are with you with these types of challenges. And so the question is going to be, how do you do that? And you have to be able to show to the OFCCP, should they come in and do an audit, that you have these in place and that you're trying to get to the utilization goal. Now, the interesting part is the regs also go on to say, well, you know, the 7% isn't rigid and inflexible, And in fact, they're not suggesting that it's a quota because quotas are expressly forbidden. However, they're still trying to increase the percentage within each area. And so it becomes somewhat challenging for organizations because while certainly these individuals who could identify in this category are certainly able to be valuable members of any organization, but as we touched on earlier, it's quite possible that many may not want to self-identify, and it's also possible that for certain areas, I was talking with a client yesterday where they were having difficulty hiring for a very specific area, and it's hard enough to find someone with the skill set, let alone trying to attain the utilization goal within the job category. So it's certainly something that's going to be challenging. It'll be different for every organization, but it is certainly an area that excuse me, organizations need to pay much more attention to. And it may also behoove you to take the opportunity to try and understand, given what the utilization goal is generally, that you want to make sure in whatever the culture of your organization is, that you really do impress upon people it's important, if they are covered, to self-identify. And certainly that there won't be any retaliation because this is a critical part of the organization, albeit forced by the government, but something to truly pay attention to that is not anything where the organization is trying to weed people out. In fact, I'd argue it's quite to the contrary. And I believe, Jerry, you have some statistics and other things that may be helpful in this area.
I just started unmuting folks so that they could ask any questions specifically of you. But then let me also tell everybody, stop typing or stop whatever. So I did have a question. When does and maybe you did cover it, Louis, but I think it bears repeating, is March 24th was when essentially the OFCCP regulations became effective, but there's this time that has, whoever's typing, stop and mute yourself. It's good. I just love that. It's one of the things we're going to have to work on as we develop more and more technology tools that allow us to converse and engage each other without a lot of filters. So make sure your phone is muted unless you want to speak. And if you do want to speak, you're free to do so. Unmute yourself and ask a question. But Louis, could you go back to what is the time frame? What if my affirmative action plan isn't until next January? Because I do it each January. Am I kind of free to take up to that amount of time to get all this thing up and running?
And to answer your question, Jerry, the suggestion would be you very well may be. However, you may still want to survey your existing employees to come up with their own baseline. Now, the challenge, of course, is you'll then be held to that, but at least you're, in essence, sort of getting started ahead of the curve, if you will.
Okay. So you're not essentially you're not going to be audited tomorrow if, in fact, your cycle time is a different period in which you start doing these things, right?
Correct. And I would add on to that it's also going to be the type of thing where if you use third parties to do any of your recruiting, and you don't have your cycle till January, it allows you, I would argue, more time to work with your third-party providers to allow the type of data retention that you're going to need when the OFCCP comes knocking.
I'm going to find out who's doing the typing and personally call you. Learn how to mute your phone. That's all I got to say. Does anybody have a question for Louis before we move on? Because there's a couple more things we want to do. I want to take only a couple minutes to talk about a couple practical concerns that I'm learning from a broad group of companies that I engage with. But I want Alma to be able to resources that are around that can be used in New Jersey. So, okay, here are a couple things that I think has to do with an attitude. And the attitude has to do with whether or not you're just going to comply with the regulations because you have to and meet whatever minimal standards, or you actually are looking at the intent of this law, which is that we make good utilization of all of the folks in our society who in fact can do the work. And so we know that there's probably about half of all of those folks who are disabled who could be working, in fact, are not working. So there's a pool of talent out there that's underutilized, and that I think is probably the intent of the law is to try, and regulations is to try to move in that direction. So now the issue is, what does it take to get beyond some of the requirements and make sure that you are in fact reaching out and making good use of those folks in the area who have the skills, knowledge, and experience to do some of your jobs. And one of the big issues I think that's going to come up is that when you start looking at who is disabled within your organization, there is a significant, what we're learning is that a significant number of your employees will not declare themselves, will not disclose that they are disabled. And if you think they are unwilling to disclose, imagine what the percentage then is of candidates who may be unwilling to disclose that in fact they're disabled. So when you get down to those candidates who are qualified and capable of doing your job, and who go on your slate, your ability to even know that you have someone who's disabled on your slate is very limited. And so one of the issues that we already addressed to some degree is in the form itself. It is not one that is easily encouraging of people to comply with. So when they go to this form, they're just not going to be kind of encouraged to do anything about it. So before you get started, you need to be able within your application and potentially within your website explain that you are an environment that welcomes people with disabilities who have the skills, knowledge, and experience to do the job. And so there's a whole series of things that more and more companies are using to be able to show that difference. So if in fact they do have people with disabilities that are visible within their employee population, do any of them get visibility on their career site? Do you make any effort to ensure that there's a balance of diversity in terms of how your career site is articulates itself or presents itself to the audience, people who are researching your company? That's number one. Number two is the application itself should, I think, very prominently and very early on offer alternative ways to apply to people who have disabilities and need some kind of assistance in terms of the application process. Forget the rest of the issues down the road for the moment. There is a choke point right at the beginning if, in fact, I have some difficulty in using the application itself. So you have an opportunity to start there. You have an opportunity when you're presenting the fact that there is a form to disclose that you can make it warmer and more engaged in relation to that. So those are some things that can be done beyond compliance. More and more I'm seeing that the companies who are at the lead in this area are also focusing in on becoming expert in one area of disability. So whether it's someone who's mentally challenged, someone who is autistic, someone who is disabled from a wheelchair point of view, someone who can't see, someone who can't hear. If you are able to build some level of expertise in your company in terms of the accommodation of at least one area of disability, you are going to get value on all the areas of disability, in a sense, by demonstrating how well you're moving in one direction. I'll give you an example. SAP, as a corporation, is targeting people who are autistic, in part because they have identified 4 or 5 key jobs within their corporation that fundamentally they believe can be done better by individuals who are autistic than by individuals who are not autistic. And they're making an effort to reach out to autistic communities to be able to accomplish that. I just find that fascinating. So if you can actually look at your business and your business area, whether it be a retail company, a bank, whatever your company has to be, and better understand what kinds of jobs within your company, in fact, you could not just accommodate, but go beyond accommodation and actually enhance the environment of your business business environment by reaching out to one or more of the communities out there. I think you're going to get a kind of a PR bump around that, as well as create much more of an environment that is sought after for those folks who can do the job and do it well. I think we're going to you need to understand in depth what the local resources are, and that's what Alma is going to start to go into in a little bit. And I also believe that within your community you should reach out to other companies like yourself who are trying to do the same kind of thing and get involved in peer-to-peer discussions around that. That could easily be done through SHRM chapters or just through connections that you might have to people around you. So I believe that there's plenty of opportunity for those kinds of networks to create, to grow. And I think in the next year to 2 years we're going to see a number of peer networks. I do think there will be chapters like some of the SHRM chapters in New Jersey that will find a way to build networks around this as well. And I do think that you can also look at technology, for example, Google Agents, in which you can ask the technology, if you will, to forward to you any information or resource that's very specific to perhaps hiring people with disabilities. And that way you have some content that would constantly come in that relates to what might be written in the area. So if there's an article written in a newspaper about how a company is developing certain practices that enable more people with disabilities to operate successfully within their corporation, it might be something that would be sent to you and you would be able to engage on that. So those are some, I think, very practical issues that almost any company can engage in and have discussions with others that will, I think, improve the positioning for both themselves as well as for those individuals who have disabilities but are able to do the work that you can present. And that, without further ado, what I'd like to do is move the discussion over to Alma and some of the issues that might be helpful from a New Jersey point of view.
Thank you. Hi, this is Alma Scott-Buzek, and I'm actually going to start with a little disclaimer. My office overlooks one of our major rail stations in New Jersey, so if you hear trains coming through, they are not coming at you, and I only get nervous when I can't hear the train. In any case, I want to talk this afternoon about a slightly different perspective, or from a slightly different perspective. As a railroad, bus, and light rail organization that is a state agency, we are not covered by OFCCP regulations. Rather, we are regulated by the FRA and the FTA, and it normally takes them about a year or two to follow up on anything that OFCCP is doing. So I'm sure at some point I'll get the joy of having to keep these statistics, get the forms filled out, hit target, but we're not there yet. So it gives me the luxury of thinking about this in a way that is not limited only to the way that we have to comply with regulations, but actually keep more focused on the true diversity aspects of this issue, i.e. the intent of the regulations, which are around the issue of how do we secure and include and capitalize on the best talent for our organizations, even if that talent happens to be differently abled. We need to try to achieve that goal, and that may be that we run into someone who's a brilliant marketer who happens to be in a wheelchair. How do we make sure that our locations can accommodate that type of situation? Or how does a department adopt a planning position to accommodate a returning veteran who's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder? Or how do we find a way to continue to utilize the skills and experience of a bus operator who lost an arm in a recent boating accident? And in those cases, one skill that is going to be very critical, and one that I believe HR is truly the key facilitator or conductor or orchestrator of, is a true interactive accommodation process. With accommodation, we often think about it as one and done. The individual comes to us, they identify, they tell us something they need, we go back and take that for management, we discuss it with them, they say no way, we ask them to come up with an idea, they come up with an idea, we take that back to the individual, we discuss it with them, they say no way. We consider ourselves that we've done our interactive process. We've done one and done, that's it. And what I would offer to you is that is not a true interactive process. That what HR needs to be able to do is facilitate a process that is iterative, that keeps looking for creative ways to involve people in our workforce to utilize their skills, regardless of any different ability or disability that they may have, and that allows us to get the most out of our workforce and also the most out of the possibilities within our business, so that our interactive processes should not end until we really have explored everything that we can possibly think of, discover, and research that might help us to get to a point where we can find a coordination between what we need and what an individual needs who's differently able. Part of that is that we really need to think outside of the box, and we need to focus on finding that solution. And we may need to engage resources both within our organization or outside of our organization. I was very excited to hear about the example that Jerry just gave about SAP, with the understanding that there are certain positions where it is possible that someone who is differently abled may be
I sent you from the 23rd to the 30th.
do the position better. Whoever is speaking, you might want to mute your phone. Be able to do their position better, or do a position better than someone who might be what we call regularly abled, for lack of a better term. So I think that's really the type of out-of-the-box thinking that will help us to engage a large percentage of our population that we haven't been as successful at incorporating into our workforces in the past. Some resources that you might be able to use are your local one-stop offices. Veterans organizations, we've had a great deal of success at working with every branch of the services has a unit that specializes on helping returning veterans to return to a non-military society, to employment, to our communities. And working with those groups, often they have ideas about accommodation that they've seen work at other organizations. They're more than willing to share with us. In a minute, I'm going to talk about some other specific local organizations, but I'm also going to talk about something that a senior executive used to always tell me, that HR is like a gaggle of geese. There's always a group of them together. They talk to each other. They share ideas. We need to rely on our gaggles, rely on other HR people. Send out an email to your network to see if anyone has faced a similar situation, because often you can find someone who's had to do some type of accommodation that you're doing or something similar that might trigger a way that you could make the accommodation work. Next slide. The other resources that I would point you towards, and this is just the very beginning of a list of what might help, are some things in New Jersey that we have found to be particularly useful. There is a website and an organization called thinkbeyondthelabel.org. And if you go into that website and put in New Jersey, it will give you all types of resources, contacts, organizations you can go through that could help you with thinking through some of these issues of accommodation, whether it's for people we're trying to hire or for current employees who suddenly find themselves with a situation where they do need to be accommodated. We've often used Ability First, both to secure candidates and also to work through some of our own accommodation challenges. And Easter Seals organization has been another one that we have used. There is a program called ARC New Jersey, and one of their programs, Project Hire, is looking at ways to bring people with disabilities into the mainstream of the workforce. So again, I think they're an excellent organization that you can look into. So that's just a very short list. If you go through any of those sites, you'll get sort of fed out or spread out to other organizations, other resources that you can use. And all I encourage everyone to do is to really think about this as an issue of the true intent, which is involving the broadest group of individuals in our workplaces. And while I know that compliance for many of us is top of the mind, I hope that we don't lose sight of the real reason that we're trying to do this. So thank you.
Alma, so have you, one of the things that occurred to me as you were talking through the list is that a lot of the colleges within New Jersey also have organizations for students who are disabled, and that through the Career Services organization of each of the colleges, you should be able to identify which student groups might have people with disabilities, so that you can also reach out to some folks who are graduating or in the process of graduating for internships, for potentially full hires. And we of course know that a lot of experienced people have gone back to college, so there are some people with significant work experience who are in fact working their way through school. So there are people who might be able to work on projects and or flexible work hour kind of things.
And that's very true, and would be another excellent resource to go through, and really reinforces something that you said earlier, which is we need to not only think about it in terms of how do we accommodate the person after they get the job, but also how do we accommodate them at any stage of our selections or interview processes.
Yeah, for me, Alma, and I admit to being extremely narrow, the first choke point is in the recruiting process. So So if we don't get people past that, we never have a chance to accommodate them in the workforce because we really haven't pushed the issues. So one of the things that you raise, I think, is the importance of collaboration between the talent management side of the house and the recruiting side of the house, if in fact they're separate in different silos. And if the person is, if it's a smaller company and it's an HR generalist that's doing both, then they have to, look at it from a slightly schizophrenic point of view in terms of the different hats that they would wear. But this critical issue of being able to reach out and identify people, I think, is a very important one. And a number of the resources you have there are powerful. I think college is another powerful resource. And if you have a local community college or a local a four-year college that's nearby your facilities, I think it makes great sense to have a meeting with the career services people and look for those kinds of opportunities, because I'm convinced that it's not just about hiring full-time people, but hiring people who may, part of their accommodation might in fact be that there are different kinds of work hours that they would be more able to be successful and skilled in relation to how they would operate with you.
Right, and that's where that creative thinking comes in terms of really being able to engage all aspects of the potential workforce. Another resource that I didn't list here because I think it's sort of second nature to us is our local SHRM chapters and the Garden State Council that has a number of innovative programs, particularly with, I know it's slightly off topic, but returning veterans and bringing them back into our workforce.
Which is great. So on our call, we have a number of people. Tim Reeser from Goodwill is on the call from Goodwill, New Jersey. Tim, can you talk? You have to unmute yourself.
Hi. Yes, I just unmuted myself. Yes. Hi. Yeah, my name is Tim Reeser.
I know Goodwill is heavily engaged
a member of TriState
in a variety of things. Could you speak to that and what you guys are up to?
Sure. Well, I can speak a little bit. I work in human resources. I'm our assistant human resources manager at Goodwill, and I have a heavy focus on recruitment and training of employees at Goodwill. So, we are a social enterprise at Goodwill. Our Goodwill is Goodwill of Southern New Jersey and Philadelphia. So, we are one of 165 Goodwills throughout North America, and our service territory covers 11 counties in New Jersey as well as the city of Philadelphia.
What do you guys do in order to engage folks with disability?
Well, we both serve as well as hire individuals with disabilities. So retail is the key to our success at Goodwill. We take, we receive donations from the public and then sell those donations throughout our 21 retail stores within Goodwill. And then we use the revenue that we generate within our retail stores to then serve individuals with disabilities and individuals with disadvantages throughout a number.
Position potentially to refer people with disabilities to companies that may be interested in working with you?
Absolutely, yes. So we have contracts with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation as well as the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation in both New Jersey as well as in Philadelphia. So we directly serve individuals who have disabilities.
If someone felt that that a partnership with you would be of interest to them from a company point of view, who would they contact?
They could reach out to me, and then I would put them in touch with our Director of Mission Services.
And you're TREESER at goodwillnewjersey.org.
At goodwillnj.org. That is correct.
So, I mean, you're the kind of resources that we want to add to, what's available in New Jersey. But you also raise the issue. So, in your own company, you have an awful lot of employees. Do you actually have a high percentage of those employees who are disabled declaring themselves, or is that a challenge for you as well?
That's a challenge for us. We have started to use the voluntary self-identification of disability form, and we began using that in late March. So we use that within the application process. So when we have applicants complete, when we have candidates complete the application form, we do provide that voluntary self-ID form as a supplement to our employment application. And then once a candidate is hired, they are then presented that voluntary form a second time as they complete their new hire paperwork. We haven't yet gotten to the point where we've been able to survey our existing workforce, but we are expecting to do that at some point later this year.
That's great. See, I love that because you're operationalizing what Lewis was talking about in the beginning, and
yes.
You also represent other pieces of what we're trying to engage. So I thank you for unmuting and responding.
Sure.
If we had the time, I probably would poke at most of the people who are on this call, and hopefully down the road when we do additional webinars, we will have more interchange back and forth between the audience as well as the folks who are speaking. But this one, I think, as we come to the end of the hour, has been very interesting for me too, because I'm constantly trying to learn new things and how far people have gone in terms of some of these things. So. Again, thank you, Tim, for responding.
You're welcome.
Anyone else have a question for Alma or Lewis in relation to what's going on here? And if you would like, I'm going to, at various points, I muted you and unmuted various folks because of the paper shuffling and other kinds of things going on. But for the moment, I've muted everybody, so if it's a comment someone wants to make, welcome to make it. And I think it's Michael. Michael, are you the one with the typing? I'm sure you are. I will be reaching out to you. So as we come to the end of the hour, Lewis, any other final comments?
Jerry, to be truthful, not really. I mean, I believe our next slide does provide some additional resources for folks to the extent that they would like to follow up on this stuff. As I mentioned when we first got started, the idea was to really deal with the practical approach to these regulations. But if you're interested in diving deeper into it, you're certainly welcome to hit one of the hyperlinks. We also gave you a hyperlink to a sample AAP that the DOL put out that may assist you if you've never had to put that together in the past. And certainly if you have additional resources that you found, just like Jerry found someone on the call who was able to add value to what we're talking about today, we would encourage you to email those suggestions in terms of additional resources into us, and we'll be happy to add those onto the information we provide through Garden State Council.
We would especially like to know how you felt about this webinar. It's a little bit more casual, and we hope to be able to do more of these in the future if they're of interest to folks. We're interested in knowing what other kinds of things you might think the New Jersey State Council might be able to do.
And Jerry, I would just add, this is Lorraine. For those of you that are certified and would like recertification credit, this has been approved for 1 general credit, and you can get that credit number by emailing the Secretary of GSC SHRM at gmail.com, and she will provide that information back to you.
And this, Elma, I would just also encourage anyone who has any other information or resources to get it to us so that we can share it with the council.
Be great. So thank you all for participating. Everybody, everybody who could come came. a very high percentage of those who signed up were here. We certainly appreciate your interest. We have recorded most of the session, and we will be posting it somewhere in relation to the Garden State Council website. And so thank you very much, and have a great day. Have a great weekend.